It's good because it keeps our industry alive, an industry that shouldn't be alive. We're the only ink on paper business in the history of the world that's still surviving. Magazines are basically gone. Newspapers are struggling. Everything else, ink on paper, is in shambles, and we're growing.
Hey guys, welcome to the inaugural episode of a new series I'm doing here on the channel called Swagglecast, a video podcast where I get to talk to interesting people and have elevated conversations about the comic hobby, industry, and culture at large. My first guest is a very influential and accomplished comic publisher, Dinesh Shamdasani. He, of course, was the former co-founder of Valiant Entertainment and the current CEO of Bad Idea Comics. His recent project MEGALITH set the comic Kickstarter world on fire, raising over $300,000 in less than 24 hours. I thought we had a wonderful conversation. We went all over the place talking about AI art, the future of comics, are comics dying, publishing, the current state of things, and even talked about, some of his big grail comic books and original art that he has in his own collection. I hope you guys enjoy this series and I hope you guys enjoy this conversation. Thank you all so much for watching. If you guys could like, comment, subscribe, I would appreciate it. And with that, enjoy the podcast. All right, well, I am with Dinesh. Dinesh, thank you so much for hopping on the channel today, man. How are you doing?
Good, man. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah. I'm super glad that we could set this up. I'm glad that we could have this conversation. Obviously, I've met you a couple times in real life now, but not to butter you up totally, but I do think that you're a very interesting person within the comic book space. I think
thank you.
There's very, very few people that can speak to comic books from which one I assume a lot of people who are watching this can on the collector side of things, or the high end, like sort of vintage, heritage auction side of things. But on the other end, you can speak to publishing, whether it be the independent space or the mainstream space. You obviously have a long history in that. And then also you can sort of talk to, comics and its relationship to film and television and like that side of thing. Cause obviously you have like such the background with, all your Valiant days and things like that. So really cool to have you here.
That's awesome. I got to bring you around everywhere. That was a great encapsulation of me. It makes me sound great. I don't know.
Yeah, I can be your hype man.
Please, yes.
Yeah, well, let's start about this. I mean, one thing I think is really interesting is with all the things that you've been doing. One of the most interesting ones recently is this Kickstarter that you did for a new book through Bad Idea called MEGALITH, and I thought that was a super cool project. Obviously, extremely successful. Later on, I want to talk about the sort of the rhetoric that maybe is sometimes thrown around that, are comics dying? And that's something I really want to hear you give a good interpretation of. But obviously with a success of a Kickstarter like MEGALITH, what you guys are doing, raising over $300,000, like in just like the first, whatever it was, day or, I guess week or so now at the time of recording, comics don't seem to be dying. There's a lot of interest in this. Can you talk about like MEGALITH a little bit and like where this project came about?
Sure. MEGALITH is, Bad Idea is a very different kind of company than any company I think that's ever existed in comics. We're not trying to take over the world. We're not trying to build a big empire. We're not trying to build Marvel. And because of that, we're able to approach things differently. MEGALITH was our point of view on the big beast that we all tackle in comics is time. The number one thing you can give a comic in order to make it better is time. It's the best rate determining factor. So we thought to ourselves, how do we build the best comic we possibly can? Well, we give it the time it needs. What would a comic look like if it took the time that it needed, if we gave it an unlimited budget, unlimited time? So Matt Kint came up with this amazing story of MEGALITH, of codename MEGALITH, actually. The title we still haven't fully revealed yet, which is this massive story of this megalithic monolith that comes crashing into Baltimore. It's this huge alien extraterrestrial device. They send teams in to try and figure out what it is. It starts 3D printing itself larger, eventually becomes this big mech robot thing, and we discover there's a larger one coming to Earth and they have to fight. We put Louis LaRosa on that book. Louis is perhaps the finest illustrator in the medium today, perhaps in the world today. And we said, take your time, do the work at the level that you're capable of, not the level the time dictates. And he's put together, if anyone looks at the pages, there's nothing in comics that's ever looked like this. And that's a wild statement, but if you look at the page, you'll see that's a true statement. So for us, it was very much trying to do justice to that. The Kickstarter campaign is for us to raise the funds to put the books out as single issues. The campaign is for the hardcover. We'll eventually put the single issues out as well. in a format that, let me put it this way, is financially irresponsible. Now that we're funded, a little less financially responsible. That's the campaign. In terms of what that means for comics as a whole, I don't subscribe to the rhetoric that comics are dying. I feel quite the opposite. I understand why it's helpful for some people to spout that rhetoric, and I understand why some people could be fooled into thinking that's what's happening, but I don't subscribe to that at all. And I think Megalith is a part of a small part of how that's not true.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I mean, if I was going to like steel man the comics are dying side, or maybe some of that discussion, is it fair to sort of say that like this model that maybe a lot of us understand as comics, which was like, okay, I'm going to go into a comic book store, I'm going to buy a single issue, and it's going to come out bi-weekly, and that's going to be how I read it. Like, is it fair to say that maybe just that single issue model is phasing out a little bit? I mean, even with your Kickstarter, you're putting out this very, very premier product. And that's one of the things I think is really nice about it, is like, you're buying this thing, I'm buying a hardcover, the art is amazing, it's beautiful, the printing quality is super, super high. But like you said, there's still an interest in doing a little bit of the single issue fulfillment. Like, where do you stand on that side of things? Like, I mean, is that model kind of just changing?
I think that model's great. It's expanding, and other models are coming into focus. But the entire medium is a monthly, or I should say, a sequential narrative in comic book single issue forums, whether that's comic book stores or newsstands. Right now, it's comic book stores. It probably will be for the lifetime of the industry. But that's the core of it. In the same way that technology changes music constantly, but live events are the bread and butter of that industry. The same way that technology changes the movie-going experience, but community-based theatrical exhibition is the lifeblood of that business. We have the same thing here in our medium. I don't think it's going anywhere. I think we see ebbs and flows. I think right now we're seeing a down period only in relation to the period we just had during the lockdown, where stores and books themselves are selling numbers they hadn't sold in decades. So I think in relation to that, we have a little bit of a hangover. We seem to be coming out of that now. I think by the end of the year, we will come out of that. Every store I talk to is having a fantastic year. Their single issue sales are down slightly, new issues. But overall, when you look at comics as a pop culture phenomenon across different tentacles of product, they're doing incredibly well. And they shift around depending on what's moving. Sometimes things like Funko Figure will do really well. They'll lean into that. Sometimes it's single issues, sometimes it's backlist, sometimes it's graphic novels, sometimes it's posters. They move around. The marketplace moves around. I think we saw a lot of people buying a lot of comic books during the lockdown, and then everything else opened up, and they said, well, I haven't been to the movie in a while. I haven't been to see my friends in a while. I've been to restaurants in a while. So they're doing that. But I think we'll see it come back and even out again over time.
Do you think there's a world where, which you said with Megalith, which I thought was super, super cool about the project, and something that was very exciting, is like you said, you gave LaRosa like the time to draw it. You guys invested financially, but more importantly, maybe like just time and resource into making it the best version of the best comic that it could be, because it's a project that you believed in. We're kind of feeling like, I think in different media forms, there's like this push-pull struggle of like, we want to put this much effort and time into a comic book series because it's got to be out every 2 weeks. Yeah. We can't spend 5 years developing a thing that we believe in. And similar in movies, I think that there's a similar idea there, where it's like, you can't make a movie for 2 years, or we can't like break a new IP because it's unproven, even if that's what people actually really want. Like, is like, where are we with that side of things? Like, do you think that there will ever be a time when like companies can do stuff like that? Or like, will like a Marvel and DC ever be able to say, hey, we're going to make invest in, the best art for this new Batman run, and we're going to, spend 3 years doing it? Like, is that ever a place that we can get back to?
No, I think we're there right now. I think what people are feeling, I think, is hindsight, right? It feels like a lot in hindsight, but it happens very slowly. DC just put out one of the best Batman books I've ever read. And I don't say that lightly. I think it's an incredible story. I think it's incredibly dynamic, and the art is phenomenal. It's that Mark Silvestri book that he's been working on for, I believe, 9 years, and it's just coming out now. That's them doing the exact same thing. He's been working on that on and off. He's done a lot of projects in between. The difference between that and Megalith is Lewis has been working on this project every day for the last 5 years. You can see it in the art. that one is definitely though DC, and they have other projects in the works that are like that I know of. Big artists, big writers, slowly chipping away at something, and when it's done, they'll put it out. I think that's an evergreen. Barry Smith just did it with his Monsters story that won a ton of Eisners, and rightly so, for lettering, for coloring, for art, for packaging, etc. That was a labor of love. I believe that was 15 or 20 years. So it definitely happens. But Marvel and DC have the pressure to hit their quarterly numbers. They have pressure to feed other departments in their ecosystem. So I think when you're looking at it the way that you are, or looking at it the way that a weekly Wednesday fan is, there's so much fast comics, if I was to try and find a phrase for it, that it feels like it's not happening a lot. And fast comics are generally not going to be as good. Again, the rewrite time, the time with the artist, the time to figure out the right coloring palette, the time to tweak the lettering, the time to work at the printer. Imagine doing all that, while you're building the size of a movie, the story the size of a movie. That's what every comic book story arc is. And you've got 20 days to do that because it's a monthly book. It drives you crazy. It's why so many editors die early at their desk, famously so.
Right. That's interesting. I mean, it does feel, when I look at like the Kickstarter stuff and like the megaliths, or even other like high profile, big successful Kickstarters, like I think of like Berserker with like Keanu Reeves and things like that. Yeah. It feels like this idea of quality is something that people really want, and not just quality, like that there's not good artists and good writers that are working at big publishing companies. Quality meaning like even just the product itself, right? Like I want like a hard cover, that's a limited print run, or like I want the best printing materials and stuff. And certainly we see that in the trade world after the fact, but maybe there's something a little more special of like, oh, this feels like more of a movie premiere. It's like this comic book premiere that is coming out. And I think that, that's kind of an interesting thing I think about a lot of like, oh, maybe we're going to move towards that model. It's like this combination of lifestyle and high quality production comics.
I think comics have a dearth of production value. I absolutely agree with you, and I think that they would do better. Marvel and DC's books are pretty abysmal in terms of production quality, and I think it probably has an impact on their readership. But keep in mind what you're seeing on Kickstarter, which is a very, very small part of comics as a whole, is our campaign is, for instance, $340,000 or whatever it is as of today, about 1,400 backers. That's 1,400 people. That's a very small contingent of the readership of a book like Megalith. When that book is out in stores, it'll sell tens of thousands of copies, if not hundreds of thousands of copies. So 1,400 people is this very thin layer that want to spend the kinds of money that Kickstarter is asking for the kind of product, this very premium product that they're getting. And I think the different mechanisms, the different distribution opportunities allow publishers and creators to be able to find their audience in different formats. So we're able to go to this audience first and say, hey, here's a product designed for exactly the specific demographic that you are, and then we're going to go to the other demographics. And that's something we're seeing all across entertainment. For me, the biggest issue comics has right now, the biggest threat to the medium, is the lack of press, the lack of legitimate, loud press. You are one of the very few, I think, that are succeeding in this world, and you found a new avenue to do it. But if you think back to even 5 or 10 years ago, CBR is completely different. Newsarama is basically gone. Multiversity is gone. Comics Alliance is gone. IGN Comics is gone. MySpace Comics is gone. There's so many of them. They're just gone. We have Bleeding Cool. We have The Beat. And then we have people like you and Comic Tom and Key Collector and social media. That's where people get their news. It's very hard for publishers to get the word out. I think that's one of the reasons the Mark Silvestri book has not done the numbers that it could have done out of the gate. I think it'll find its audience eventually, but I think DC has struggled to get people to have the awareness that this book is out.
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually be curious to hear you talk about that. As much as I'd love to think that I have some impact on the comic space.
Impact.
Well, thank you for saying that. But I wonder, like, where do you think the average comic book person like gets their sort of news, like, like understanding of like what's going on in the market? Like, do you think it's CBR still? Do you think like these news sites, like where do you think it is, or is it just nowhere? Like, is it just?
No, I think it's probably 3 places. It's definitely not places like CBR. We know that for sure because CBR, not only are they mostly listicles of MCU movies, the very few times they do talk about comics, they get it wrong. I've seen lists of here are the 10 best characters dressed in green, and half of them aren't even dressed in. I'm like, who wrote this? A robot wrote this. I don't know what's going on here. I think it's friends, your kind of community of readers that are with you. Maybe they're friends you grew up with, maybe they're friends you've made in the hobby, maybe they're people at the store, maybe they're store owners. That kind of word of mouth, social media, which feeds a lot of that first one. So people on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, wherever they're at, Facebook, they hear from their larger community, the kind of global community that they've tapped into. And then there's kind of influencers, talking heads like you and Comic Tom and others like that. Brian McClay's another one, Nerdy Girl, Skeleton Key, Rage Theo. There's so many of them. And you guys all have different points of view. Some tackle it from new comics, some tackle it from specs, some tackle it from artistry. And people, I think, watch those shows and then they learn information from that. Bleeding Cool is the one kind of traditional place that I think still has an impact. Everything else, it doesn't really have an impact. And you can tell it doesn't have an impact because Marvel and DC aren't leading into it. You're not getting exclusives over there. They're not putting their creators in front of them to do interviews. It's not worth the time.
Yeah, well, I'm still waiting for Marvel to call me up and talk about new Marvel books because they haven't yet. But
you haven't been doing it. To be honest, you haven't been doing it. I think once they see you starting to do it, I bet you do get people reaching out.
That's true. Maybe we'll see.
My prediction is 6 months from today, I'll be on your channel and I'll see some giant creator doing a one-on-one interview with you. That's my bet.
All right. Well, we'll see if people are interested in that. Because let me ask this, in kind of relation to that. I find that a lot of the people who watch my channel are obviously kind of coming from like a collector side of things. And clearly I lean into more of that conversation of the comic book collecting side of it.
Yeah.
I do a lot of reading and I'm very interested in that stuff. And like, I write myself and I'm interested in that world, but I can tell that my audience isn't necessarily like hungering for that sort of content. Now it could just be that this is the group of people that I've sort of carved out my niche for. But why do you think that in comics, there's been such like a split of like the comic reader and the comic book collector? Like it feels like maybe at one point it was a little more closely associated, but is it just the advent of trades and like digital comics and things like that?
I don't think it is split. I think the split is not the individual. I think the split is the individual's choice book by book. So you and me, as for instances, we're both collectors, but we're both also readers. And I can tell you from my own experience, there are books that I will collect that I haven't read, that maybe one day I will, but I don't have a burning desire right now. There are books that I will read that I don't collect. Maybe they're not really collectible in that way, or I personally don't feel they are. And the vast majority of books are in that middle section where I both read and collect. All my collector friends, the ones that spend a good amount of money buying books, they're the only ones I know that have read Amazing Spider-Man 129, Hulk 181. I have a buddy, he's a huge collector of art and comics. He just told me this week he read Crisis on Infinite Earths for the first time. I don't know anyone that's read Crisis recently. That doesn't mean people aren't, just in my wheelhouse. There are people that read it back in the day, but modern readers that I know aren't really reading that book. He read that because he's heard so much about it from the collectible world. I think in order to be a good collector, you have to be a very good reader. You can't know where the first appearances are, where the key moments are, where the big stories are, unless you're able to consume that. And I think reading is a huge part of that. We approach it at Bad Idea a little differently, and I think partly we've had success where a lot of companies come in and they say, we're going to tackle the FOMO spec guys, the collector base, and they don't really get that traction. I think partly it's because they've misunderstood that those collectors are the same people as the big readers. There are exceptions to every group. I'm sure there are a minority of people that are just collectors, a minority of people just readers. I think the vast majority pick and choose what book falls into which percentage for them. And I think that we have this conversation because there's certain things that ping one versus the other for us.
Right. Well, I would say that, in fairness to you and in Bad Idea, I think what I see is I see Marvel and DC has done a good job, or whatever term you want to use for it, in creating, obviously ratio variants and things like that in order to kind of appeal to maybe that speculator crowd.
Yeah.
But like you said, like, I'm not sure if that ratio variant is exactly the collector. I think they understand maybe a speculated mindset, but maybe not necessarily a collector. Now, Bad Idea, you guys have done some stuff which, for better or for worse, some people love it, some people hate it. You've done like interesting things like invisible comics and stuff, which no matter where you sit on the fence with that, I would say that that's a very interesting collectible that does sort of appeal to a collector, and less the 1 in 100 variant speculator. Like, can you talk a little bit about like the Bad Idea? Like,
yeah, sure. I think that it's impossible for that to be a reader book. Obviously, there's no book there, right? It's a CGC slab series of acetate, transparent acetate, with 2 staples on it to look like a comic book. But I think that what we saw that was interesting. Let me explain where it comes from, and I think that'll help explain what we're seeing in terms of the person that's interested in that. Most of the people, Bad Idea is a very small team. There's 5 people at Bad Ideas: myself, Adam Freeman, Josh Johns, Anthony Matano, Peter Stern. Then we have a slew of creators, a bunch of freelance creators. But in terms of the team itself, the core publishing team, it's 5 people. Normally, a company doing the kinds of things we're doing, you'd be 35 people. So we all work very hard, and that sometimes we're a little slow with things because of that. We all worked, with the exception of Anthony, we all worked at Valiant together. Anthony's been in the industry a long time. He was at a retail store, Maximum Comics. And we did Valiant the way that a lot of publishers, basically all publishers, approach publishing, which is, let's try and be a mini Marvel. What percentage of Marvel can we be? Can we be 1% of Marvel? Great, we have a successful company. We did everything the way you're meant to, and it worked very well. We were very lucky, won a lot of awards, sold a ton of books. But now starting our own company, we didn't start Valiant. We lived in someone else's house, the house that Jim Shooter and Bob Layton and Barron Smith and David Lapham, all those guys built. Building our own house, we approached it with this point of view of, well, we're inside the business. In order to bring Valiant back, we had to really learn how to make the business work. So we have this point of view of how to make a better mousetrap. Let's try and do that. But let's try and do that in service of a bunch of people that are friends getting to make comics for the rest of their lives together, as opposed to let's take over the world. And with that approach, it would have been a little boring for us to do the same thing over again. So we kind of have a meta commentary going on with the industry. In terms of the Invisible comic book, it came from this conversation. It came a conversation about people, we've all collectors, all slabbed collectors, I should say, have this they've heard this adage: don't buy the grade, buy the book. But there are tons of collectors that just buy, says 7.5, I'm going to buy the book. The book looks like a 6. They don't care. Yeah. Or it's got a signature crease or a subscription crease or something on it. Oh, the signature's in the wrong place. Bad placement. They'll buy the grade. And the knock on graded books is, well, you've got a graded book, you'll never read it, which is ridiculous because there's 100 ways to read a comic book that don't require you to, especially a famous comic book. You can buy a trade and an omnibus and central collection, digital. There's a lot of ways. Or you could crack it, I suppose. We thought, okay, why don't we take that to the extreme? Can we do a book that literally you're just buying the slab, not the book? And that evolved into the Invisible comic book. And what we found was, almost like in a fine art, Banksy, Warhol way, people wanted to have that as a showpiece in their collection. Not necessarily to collect and invest in. There was a lot of that as well. But there was a lot of people saying, my collection feels like this is what I've been waiting for to complete it. They have a wall like you do in behind you. I've got a room, and they've got a spot that they've been in their minds. It's got a book, and it's in their minds. There's something that's missing. Mm-hmm. And it's this commentary. And so we've tried to lean into that. And we've tried to poke fun of the medium and collecting and publishing and the way creators are and the way we are, stuff that we're also part of the problem for. We've tried to just put a mirror to it and say, isn't this interesting? And that was one of them.
What's your thought on expanding on this, but not necessarily having to speak to the Bad Idea stuff? Like, a lot of people talk about, the gimmick covers, like even if we go back to the 90s and we do like foils and die cuts and things like that. To me, it feels like there's obviously something fun about them, right? Like there's nothing wrong with them in a vacuum. No. But obviously, like all things do, like if something works, people are going to chase those trends, and then it's, we're going to make a lot of them. Like, where do you think those gimmicks fit into the space? And then also, like, because on the flip side, here you are, like, you're making like true art, with Megalith, right? Like, it's like you guys are putting your heart and souls into this story. and then you have an invisible comic book too, or a foil cover. Like where do those things belong?
I think they work in concert. I think they can work in concert. When they do work in concert, they're greater than the whole. To me, they're very much like, I love movies. A lot of people love movies. My favorite types of movies, I went to film school, so you watch a ton of very influential, venerated films, and I love those movies. And some of my favorite movies are things like The Bicycle Thief or The Red Balloon. But my absolute favorite movies, and most people I think would agree with this, are big Hollywood tentpole movies done correctly. My absolute favorite movies: Terminator 2, Aliens, Pirates of the Caribbean, Gladiator. It's amazing when the core character arc, all the stuff you need to make a venerated movie works, and then you've got this layer on top of it of commerciality and sheen, and then the marketing and the music and everything works together. It's really exciting. I think comics are the same way. I think gimmicks certainly have a place. They started as a solution for sampling. So when you have Amazing Spider-Man 389, 390, 391, 392, and someone new is trying to get into that run, they can't start at 1. Where do they start? Well, if you slap some foil on the cover, they're more likely to pick it up. That's their first book. They then learn, oh, this is giving me enough information to understand Spider-Man. I can now go forward. And over time, I can go back and try and find the great stories from the past. It worked tremendously well that way. For me, it works very, very well when they couple the gimmick with something to do with the characterization of the characters. So the Ghost Rider Volume 2, Issue 15, the glow in the dark.
Glow in the dark, yeah.
It's I mean, like, who doesn't want that? Ghost Rider, the glow in the dark version, I think that's incredible. Things like that I think are great. We did metal covers, and we did them just for when I was at Valiant. Exo Manowar, who's a metal character, Bloodshot, who's full of nanites, and Ninjak, who's got a lot of metal weapons, and we had all the metal weapons flying at the reader. When I left, they started to do them with much less effect on characters like Shadow Man, and I think that they struggled with those because there was not a connection to the character for the reader. They weren't excited about it. If you had a Terminator book, I'm just looking back here at the Terminator thing here. If you had this one here, if you had a comic book, Terminator comic book in a metal cover, I'd be excited. If it was an embossed metal cover, I'd be very excited. If it looked like that, it was an embossed endoskeleton arm, I'd be excited. If you put that metal cover on Spider-Man, I don't know that I care. I think it's there's a incongruity, there's a disconnect.
Yeah.
So I think they can work when, like everything, you have the right creative pairing for it. I think you have to treat the marketing with the same reverence as you do the writing and the artistry.
That's a really good way to put it, and something that I completely agree with you. If everything is holistically back in service to like the story or what the book represents, then it's cool. Like you said, you can have a die cut Wolverine cover and his claws are slashing through, and that makes sense.
Wolverine 50, amazing.
Yeah, so those are cool, but I think maybe where some of the allergy comes from a lot of collectors is when it gets overplayed and overdone. And like you said, it's not it is a gimmick for gimmick's sake, which I might have some sympathy towards people that have to make them, because I'm sure, as like somebody who has to kind of like penetrate in markets where there's a lot of noise.
Yeah.
Obviously now you're not only are comics competing with other comics, you're competing with other entertainment. So like, are we in a world with comics where, whether it be gimmicks or some kind of big marketing thing, like even me, someone who does a Kickstarter, like I'm obviously marketing to like, I have to have a whole YouTube channel to be successful, to get people to back my comic book, or other people have to have Keanu Reeves literally like drawn in his book to be successful. Like, is that just the nature of entertainment, the beast? Like, you're going to have to get through in some way, or can we ever get to a point where a comic will just speak for itself? Like, just it'll be word of mouth. It'll just be well read, and people are going to.
No, I don't think a comic will speak for itself. I hate to say that. I don't think it will. I don't know that it ever did. At least it hasn't been that way since I've seen it. But I think that barrier to entry for any entertainment medium is there, because people come to it because they love it, and they're willing to do anything because they love it. It's a passion for them. And so it's a lot of competition. But yeah, I think, unfortunately, I don't subscribe to the adage that if you make something great, people will show up. I think that if you make something great, it's the core. It's the first thing you have to do. Without that, it doesn't work. But you're not even halfway there. You've got to figure out the business. You've got to figure out the marketing. You need all three legs of that stool, or it won't work.
Right, right. Let me ask you this and change gears a little bit. This idea of you have definitely a familiar background with everything in entertainment and Hollywood. And I think for the last like handful of years, there's been certainly a large push in getting a lot of comics option to screen.
Yeah.
That seems to be, and for good reason, like that seems to be, a great thing for the creators involved in it. If they can get their, IP licensed to a movie or a TV show, yeah. Obviously that's, the end game for a lot of people, especially if you want to be successful. We're seeing it more and more. We're seeing a lot of stuff option, obviously in the speculator world of things. Everyone is looking towards that side of stuff. Do you think that this is something that, one, is good for the comic book market? And do you also think that, is it also like hurting the medium in some ways? And let me elaborate on that just a little bit more. Is there an idea of like, oh, let me just think of like the most Hollywood elevator pitch comic book idea that I can think of, and I'll do some issues on it, and really the end game is going to be like, let me sell this to like some production company. And maybe there's a place for that, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, if the comic book is cool, then who cares? No harm, no foul. But like, obviously, like this idea of like, oh, I'm going to just really expand on the art itself and have it be like, what's the amazing storytelling within this medium that we can explore? Where do you think we are in terms of that? Do you think that this is a good thing? This is just like the nature of the beast? Like, where do you think we go from here? And is it just going to be more like comics are just sort of the proving ground for Hollywood to feel good about an IP they're going to invest in?
Hollywood is, I mean, comics are definitely proving ground for IP for Hollywood. I would say comics are, I can't think of anything even close to it, the most valuable medium right now for adaptation. Hollywood, film and TV are both constantly looking at comics, obviously. So many options. And that's good and bad. It's good because it keeps our industry alive, an industry that shouldn't be alive. We're the only ink on paper business in the history of the world that's still surviving. Magazines are basically gone. Newspapers are struggling. Everything else, ink on paper, is in shambles. And we're growing. If you just look at the last 5 years, we're growing. This last 6 months or so is a little dip, but we're still much higher than we were years ago, and certainly where we were in the late 90s, early 2000s. We're much, much, much stronger. This is, I think, among the strongest years on record this last couple of years. But there are downsides. Yeah, sure. There are plenty of books that I hear about and I'm excited about, and I go read them, and I'm like, this is a piece of crap. It's the most sophomoric, surface level version of this high concept that was cool, and you haven't tackled tone, and you haven't tackled characterization, you haven't tackled arc, you haven't tackled theme or metaphor, because you're just trying to get something fast out there for agents and for executives, and that's a bummer. I'm sure there are examples of that are good, and I can't tell because they're successful. Right. I can't tell that this was just a pitch in comic book form, and so there's that positive. But I think it also allows creators a lot of freedom. Charles Soule has a huge hit in 8 Billion Genies, which is a phenomenal book, and that's given him the freedom to choose his next projects a little more carefully. He's always been very careful, but I think take creative swings, and I bet you we're going to get something out of him next couple of years that's just wildly original and wildly his personality and tone, something that normally wouldn't have existed if he was, and as successful as a writer as he is, he would have been at Marvel and DC writing those big books. We never would have got that thing. So I think we're probably going to get a lot of those kinds of things, which is the positives.
Do you think, to that point, is the space to be in for a lot of of the premier like artists and comic book writers to be in the indie space and not be incentivized to go to Marvel? I mean, obviously it's cool to have Spider-Man on your resume. Like, I mean, who doesn't want that? But at the same time, like, is that make it hard to sort for Marvel or DC to kind of attract like the best talent?
I think what we've seen a lot this year, we've seen a lot of big creators go back to Marvel and DC, partly because single issues have dropped a little bit in retail, which has meant that creator-owned books aren't as profitable as they used to be. So Marvel and DC have an influx. Okay. I think over the next 6 to 12 months, you'll see some big announcements, some big creators going back to Marvel and DC. But no, I think it's always been a certain way, and it always should be a certain way, which is that, with the exception of maybe Robert Kirkman, I can't think of anyone else that fits this exception. You have to make your bones at Marvel and DC as a creator. You have to go tell a successful, decent-sized story or series of stories with the biggest characters to build your fan base, to build your audience, to be able to say, hey, well, now I'm going to go and do this thing over here. All the Image founders did that. Every major Image book I can think of, with the exception of Walking Dead, the creator did that. All the Boom books, IDW, etc., they've all been that way for the biggest creators.
Right.
So I bet that continues.
Right. And that kind of goes into your, esteem later on when, if you go to shows and cons and stuff, like, I mean, chances are most people are having you sign a Marvel and DC work that you did versus like, your indie comic book, as successful as it may or may not be.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's impossible to fight those. I mean, and it's not a bad thing. Wolverine is awesome. Wolverine's amazing. Yeah. And he's got this juggernaut of now Disney behind him, pushing him in a million different ways. Plus, the best creators in the history of the medium have worked on that book, on that character, with more resources than you would get anywhere else, and have told incredible stories. So we're all emotionally connected to those characters.
Right. Let me transition one more time. I wanted to ask you about AI art. Obviously, AI art's becoming like a kind of a big thing. Who knows, like, how
after AI art, it's religion, abortion rights, politics.
Yeah.
Like that's the right.
We're going through the whole gamut here. We're gonna hit them all.
AI art. Here we go.
Yeah. So this is the next phase of the show. Now that I've got you roped in, AI art obviously being a big thing, and I think it was kind of like a big discussion, at least in some of the comic creator circles that I was kind of like soaking through osmosis. Yeah. It felt like there are people that are concerned about it. I mean, I work in entertainment. WGA is concerned about it, so I understand that side as well. What's your feeling on it as far as where it is? Like, do you have like a Black Mirror future envisioned in your mind with it, or do you have like this is going to be Jarvis and I'm going to be like Tony Stark, the comic book creator, later on?
I have a point of view on where it is now, which is easy to have because we can see where it is, and I have a hope for where it goes. I can give you those two.
Yeah.
Where it is now, I think is it's crap. I mean, it's early. It's very obvious the influence it's pulling from. You could very easily call that theft. It probably is theft. I think legally they're still trying to figure that out. Although I would be surprised if they don't come down on the side of it is theft. Perhaps when they massively increase the inputs, you'll start to get that black box effect where we can't quite tell. In the same way a human being has influences and you can't quite tell because there's just so many of them. How you legally get all that input in there for lawyers to figure out. But I look at AI art and I don't think it's serviceable today. I've seen one AI book ever that I thought was good, and I'll talk about it in a second. But mostly what I see in AI art is not the problems of anatomy or the fingers or things like that. That'll all get solved. I think that the vast majority, my guess is the vast majority of what it's pulling in terms of influences are photographs that we're taking in our day-to-day life with our cell phones, and we're all looking directly at the camera and posing, which is the exact opposite of what a good story looks like. You want angles that give the reader the subconscious feeling of drama or of theme. You want dynamic angles, the kinds of things that are just you're not going to take photographs of. So whenever I see AR art, it's because someone's put an input of what they want, and they've just got the character standing here looking at you. Maybe there's another character in the foreground over here somewhere, right? And it looks like like this, looking right at you, and it doesn't look good. It looks very stilted, and there's no drama, there's no cinematic nature to it, there's no artistry to it. That's a big problem. I don't know how they solve for that. I'm sure they will down the road. So right now I'm not worried about it because it's just not a tool. My hope is that down the road it becomes a tool. I don't know that it should ever be a tool that replaces humans. I'm not worried about that. We bring too much to the table, but I think it can be a tool in the same way that a life model is, or SketchUp is, or photo references are, if you're using them correctly, where you can experiment. You can have a shorthand for explaining ideas back and forth between a writer and an artist, or a publisher and a creative team. You can experiment. You can try things. You can, in the same way a typewriter made it faster, or a word processor. I think it's a writing tool in terms of being a writing partner, not a writer, or a artist tool in terms of being a support system for the artist as opposed to being an artist. I think it can be very valuable that way. I think technology has always come and scared everybody and then found itself to be just a support to human beings. The one book that I have seen that I really liked is a book that I'm a little biased here since I helped a little bit with it. It's a book called Blank Canvas, which I saw at Comics Pro, and was an interesting story about an artist's journey through artist block, through writer's block, through creation block. And the whole story was told using AI art. And he must have worked the hell out of that art and done a lot of work on top of the art. It wasn't just AI art. I think he did a lot of work. Because it didn't have that problem. It had, interesting angles, interesting characters. And it was a story that fully owned, this is made by AI, and this is about the future of AI. And is it going to help us? Is it going to inspire us? Or is it going to kind of take creativity away from us, and down the road we won't be creative? And I thought that was quite interesting. And ultimately the sentiment at the end I thought was really empowering about, well, you've just got to sit down, you've just got to keep creating. That's the way to break through it. And AI art can't stop us from doing that. I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, I can see it from both sides, and kind of like you said, it feels like, well, we're not, I don't expect going into my, comic book store next week and buying a book that is like, sellable right away from AI generated material. Yeah. But who knows? I mean, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, how this tech stuff, it has the exponential growth.
Yeah, sure.
I do think it's interesting, this idea, and I'd love to hear you think about or respond to this, is, my what sort of like positive outlook is that, maybe it'll just be kind of like plugins that artists or writers, whoever can use in the future, or like, maybe, hey, Swagglecast wants to write a comic book and he wants to work with Todd McFarlane. Yeah. Todd McFarlane was never going to draw for me, to begin with, but I could license from him his AI, whatever. And then all of a sudden Swagglecast can write a book drawn by Todd McFarlane. That is like, and he can get whatever percentage that he's owed out of that. And that's kind of an interesting thing that I see where this could go.
That's probably, I think that's a ways down the road. I know the movie business consider that a lot. George Lucas has been running around for decades buying up the rights to dead celebrities. So I think he owns like James Dean and Marilyn Monroe. And his idea was someday he's going to direct a movie with the greatest cast of all time. It's going to be all the greatest movie stars, James Cagney, etc., that have ever lived in one movie, because he owns the digital rights and he's going to be able to recreate them at some point. It's not dissimilar from what you're talking about. I just don't know that it's interesting. I'm far less interested in a story written by you, drawn by AI art in the style of Todd McFarlane, no matter how good it is, versus a story written by you with an artist you found that you're excited about, that's voicey and new and fresh. I think that's interesting to me. That doesn't say that there wouldn't be, and I'm sure there will be, thousands of uses for AI. I just don't see it replacing us in that way. I think it'll replace pieces of us, which will save us time, and then we'll just focus and get better at the things that are uniquely human.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, like you said, it's always, these things are ultimately tools that in theory should be designed to create the best story. And so at the end of the day, can AI tell the best story without the best storytellers? Probably not. You're still going to need people to, point it in a certain way and evoke a certain thing. Unless we're talking about, a banger variant cover, which, maybe AI can knock out a banger variant cover, which,
Sure. I'm sure things like that. Yeah, we've seen, didn't Brian Haberlin put an AI cover together recently? I
think so. I know Brian McClay was talking about a lot of the AI stuff, and he was pointing to a lot of interesting cover work and things like that. So, could be interesting. I think it's a topic to probably revisit and see where we're at, every 12 months, because I think it's going to change quite a bit.
But the movie business is obsessed with it. Joe Russo famously said he thinks that there'll be a movie created by AI that everyone will love. And I know I have friends at Amazon, and they're obsessed with this idea that you go to Amazon Prime and you won't go and look at the movies. You'll say, you know what I like? I like Aliens. So AI, Amazon algorithm, please create a movie for me in the vein of Aliens, kind of like a James Cameron thing, but I want it to be about something. I'm trying to think what hasn't Cameron done. I want it to be about time. He's done time travel. He's done space. He's done underwater. A period film.
Zombie movie.
Yeah, but great. Zombie, thank you. A zombie movie in the vein of Aliens with Sigourney Weaver and James Cameron. And there it is. And it's probably pretty good. I don't think it'll be great, but it'll be pretty good. Yeah. And maybe I'll think it's great because it's specifically for me. And maybe no one else will ever see it.
I think we are going to move that way. I mean, we live in our own sort of YouTube communities or
Yeah.
social communities and stuff. So it's like, yeah, all you need is going to be 1,000 people that really, really want, this movie. And if one person has the ability to make it and everyone's charging $20, like they can just make their own living,
Yeah,
That's
kind of sad, right? I mean, personally, my favorite experiences with movies have been community going, has been in the theaters with people, everyone's gasping at the same time, everyone's jumping at the same time. To not have that experience would be sad.
Yeah, I think it would be too, but
Well, maybe we're a generation. We're like the buggy with people being like, what do you mean a car? My horse is my best friend. I would never want to ride around on a thing that I don't know. It's just a hunk of metal.
Yeah. We are definitely that sort of the generation, and it is interesting to think, yeah, maybe it's not going to be us that fully adopts this stuff, but our kids and that generation and the younger generation and so on and therefore. Speaking of that, actually, let me quickly, we don't have to go too long on this, but let me quickly ask you about this because I think this is interesting. What about this idea of like Web3 and digital collectibles, and even like what DC's doing with like Batman cowls and like stuff? I don't know if you've like heard too much about that, or if you're in that space. What's your thought on that stuff? And if that stuff applies to like sort of the younger kids, like, oh, I want to have the digital megalith, whatever, but I still want the collectability in it. So I still want to know that my copy is one of 1,000 on the blockchain or whatever it is. Like, have you dove into that or looked into that?
Oh yeah. Unfortunately, my role as CEO and Chief Creative Officer at a publishing company means anytime there's a conversation to be had about some of this, I have to now educate myself, and I have to have the conversation internally for investors, the board, the team, the employees, creators, etc. So yes, unfortunately, I've spent too much time looking at Web3 and NFTs and digital collectibles and monoprints and all that stuff. I don't know. I don't think it's anywhere near a place where it's interesting at the moment. We looked at it to explore if there's anything interesting to be done there. It doesn't seem to, especially for a company like us, where we are very we've bet the farm on physical, on traveling to a store. We're only available through comic book stores. This Kickstarter is one of the, I think, 2 times we've ever not done that. And even then, it's a physical product. We've never done digital. We don't do trades beyond this hardcover. We don't do variants. We've never done a variant. I just don't know. I don't know what the get is. I don't know what the thing that's unique about it. Perhaps if we're all living in the metaverse, is that still a thing that's going to happen? I know that was for a second.
I think Mark Zuckerberg is going to go down with the ship with it no matter what. He's going to work till it happens.
So yeah, maybe if we all have a digital home, you want a digital piece of art for it. I see the value with digital artists. I see the value with digital artists selling their kind of like putting their stamp on something, saying this is the original. I get that.
Right.
Beyond that, I don't know. It's cool. It's just not as cool as stuff that we're making, the stuff that you typically make. But I'm sure, having said that, I'm sure someone will have an epiphany and have an idea, and they'll turn it a little bit, and it'll be interesting. I just haven't seen it yet.
Yeah. Do you think do you think it is just sort of like the display factor and being able to like appreciate it? Because obviously, something we should talk about this, but you obviously are a big fan of not only just the comic books, but like in the original art space, you have like a lot of original art, covers and things like that.
Too much, my wife would say.
Well, yeah. You can send some my way. I'll happily take some.
I've been trying to. That reminds me. I've got it. Yes. Okay. Well, enough of this.
But touching on this idea, like you said, I don't know how many artists now still work by doing hand-drawn art.
Majority.
Oh, they are. Okay, good. I mean,
there's a lot. It's not like 90%. It's probably like 70.
Got it. Would you say that younger artists still go in that mold, or
anecdotally, from my standpoint, it's the older artists that are moving to digital, the ones that have done it for years, that have found that they can add techniques to their work. I wonder, I'm not an artist, but I work with artists all day. I wonder if the trajectory that will crystallize is that you learn your trade physically, and then you crystallize it, and you master it, and then you add the layers of digital on top of that. I wonder if that's what this medium is going to be, because the ones that I'm seeing moving to digital are Bill Sienkiewicz, Joe Quesada, those guys that are just, they're absolute masters, and now they're like, what new worlds are there to conquer? How can I add to my very vast Rolodex of tools?
Gotcha. Well, yeah, I mean, maybe in the future there will be, like we said, like Web3 digital artists, and maybe there's a place for that. But yeah, it's interesting. I guess that you can't replace the tactile feel. Even people who love using tablets and stylus and things like that, I think still talk about the tactile feel of doing it hand. So that's kind of interesting.
The barrier to entry is huge for anything Web3. I have friends that are in that world. They drop NFTs and they do all sorts of stuff, the names of which I can never remember. And I go to these events with them, and I'm always seeing cool stuff. Like, I remember someone had a shirt with a QR code and everyone was flocking to go with the shirt, and they had their phones out, and they were scanning the thing, and they got like a token. I can't remember what it's called. It's like a proof that you were there and you met this person.
Right.
And they were like, you should do it. And I was like, all right, how do I? And it took me like an hour, and I still couldn't figure it out. With all these people, all these tech specialists around me trying to get it to work. And I was like, this is crazy. And I started to ask them, why are you excited about all this? And it's tech fetishism. I think right now, a lot of the people that are really into Web3 are just tech people. They have the first of all sorts of tech shit. And right now, this is like the pinnacle of this is the bleeding edge of where tech is. And they're there. For the majority of people, I think they got to dumb it down. They got to find broader ways to get us to engage with it. It'll probably come, but I think we got a long time before it becomes ubiquitous.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Last little thing I kind of wanted to finish out with you to discuss a little bit is, the stuff that you do have in your collection. You were recently on a show with 2 Chainz, showing off some big books. Can you set up that show a little bit in case people haven't seen it?
It's a show called Most Expensivest. The host is a guy named 2 Chainz, and what they do is they go to places and they show you the most expensive version of something. And this season they went to collectors and they said, show us a collection of things that are incredibly rare and incredibly expensive. And the whole point is 2 Chainz is meant to go and make fun of you for being an idiot for spending money on this stuff. He did not do that with me. I don't know why, but the others that I've seen, he's quite vicious with. I didn't know this when I agreed to be on the show.
Did you convert him into a comic book collector? Was he like, oh man, let me buy an A15 now? Is that like his attitude?
No, he actually is a little bit of a comic book fan. I couldn't really tell. He was mostly reacting, he's doing his job. But there was one point where he got very excited. Actually, I upset him. This didn't make the cut. I was showing him a Hulk 181. I have a 9.8 white pager, really nice, great centering. It's got a date stamp. I like date stamps. A lot of people don't. And I was showing it to him, and I was explaining this is the first appearance of Wolverine, and he appeared in Hulk, and that's what a lot of what comics is. And he goes, "Oh my God, Wolverine I love Wolverine. First appeared in this book." I said, "Yeah, this is the one." He goes, "I want one of those." Great, they're it's rare, but it's not that rare. They do come up every couple months. You can get one, and lower grades come up even more often, and it's a very famous sought after book. And he goes, "Yeah, but I want one now. Is that one for sale?" I said, "Well, no, I'm not really looking to sell this one." And he goes, "Well, what is it worth?" And I think I said $100,000, which is about market. And he goes, "Oh, okay." And I said, "Well, but for you, 2 Chainz." He goes, "Yeah, 200,000." Terrible kind of dad joke.
Yeah.
And he flipped, and he got real quiet, and he was like, "I have a lot of power. I can cut this segment. No one will ever know you're here." And I'm like, okay, I thought I was doing you guys a favor.
Yeah.
I look up the director and he's like, keep going. This is great. But it didn't make the cut. I was hoping
he didn't get your sense of sarcasm, I guess.
No.
He did not appreciate it.
Again, I didn't know. I'd never seen this show. I'd never even heard of him, frankly, which is on me. He's quite famous. I didn't know the whole point of the show was he goes and he calls you out for saying, this is what this one. He goes, "No, it's not. I wouldn't pay that. You're an idiot. Or what are you doing spending all your money?" The guy after me had like a Pez collection, and he destroyed that guy.
Right.
The only full episode I've seen is the one I was on, but he was very mean to the others on that.
That's funny. So as someone who, is in the big collectible world and has all this art, you famously, you have some great pages, ASM 300. I mean, you had it on loan to the Spider-Man Museum.
Yeah.
What's your thought? Like, even just from a collector side, like, what's the end game here with a lot of this stuff? Do you buy because you love it? Do you fancy yourself an investor in any sort of way? Like, Talk about that a little bit. I imagine if there are people who watch my channel that are, still watching this podcast and stuff, they're very interested in this type of stuff. Cause I know a lot of people just sit on a lot of their stuff. Like, what is it for you? Like, what's your thought?
It has to be both. I mean, I think it has to come first from a place of, I love this thing and it's worth this much to me.
Right.
Anytime I have bought something because I thought, well, that's a famous thing, or I don't love it, but I know it's important, or I think it's a good price, I've regretted it and I've made a mistake. Anytime I bought something where people said that's too much money, you shouldn't buy that, but I love it and I'm like, that I'm happy to pay that. I'm so excited to get this thing. It's worked out wonderfully for me. Spidey 300, the cover, is a great example of that. But yes, I do think about, you've got to insure it. You've got to make sure it's kept properly. You've got to make sure I've got little kids, they don't color it in. You've got to think about, will I ever be in a position where I need to sell this? I have a budget for myself and I don't spend money that I can't afford to. I'm very lucky. I had a painful yet profitable situation at Valiant, and I've said it before, I have a Valiant shaped hole in my heart that I'm trying to fill with this stuff and with bad idea. I'll give you an example. My hope for Spidey 300 is that I never sell it. I understand it'll continue to appreciate. I hope it will. I think it will. I understand it's very important. Very happy for it to be in a museum where people can see it, so I don't feel guilty about it being in an elitist home somewhere. But I hope I give it to my kids, and I hope that they can hold on to it. And I don't know, if you ever see me selling it, I probably either I'm in trouble or I have a big business idea that I want to fund, and it's worth more to me to fund that thing and create something that is to hold on to this. Or I guess maybe I get bored of it. I think that would be unlikely. But yeah, I do think about it, and I do watch the market and make sure that I feel comfortable with that investment, because it's a lot of money. It's just irresponsible not to. Any of the books you have in the background over there, they're valuable books. There's an Avengers 1, Avengers 4, there's that Spidey 6. Those are big books. First Kang, first Iron Man, first X-Men. If you weren't thinking about what those things cost and would they hold their value, it'd be foolish. You have to. But those are those books and not other books, because you love those books. They have to go hand in hand for me.
Yeah. Well, as someone who, just knowing some of the things that you have and climbing the top of the collection mountain, so to speak, do you find joy in it in the same way that maybe say you once did? Or like, what is the next chase? Are you like this food critic that like has to fly to like exotic locations and taste the most ridiculous ingredients now? Like, what's your collecting world now?
Comics became, I'm going to sound like such an ass. Comics came like that for me. I built a little room in my house, and I built shelving on it, kind of like you have. And I said, I want someone to walk in here, and every major first appearance, every major comic book is in here. So they can't say, well, where's this? I go, well, here it is. But not only do I have it, it's a 9.8 white pager, newsstand, Mark Jeweler. It's like, you didn't know this book existed. That's the goal I set for myself. And I got close to that, but I stopped because I got bored. Which is awful to say, because I still do enjoy it. I still go in that room. That room's still there. But I moved to original art, and I don't think there's any getting bored of original art. And original art is it could be a piece like Spidey 300 that costs a lot of money, or I bought something the other day that's a piece of Valiant art. I spent about $180 on it, and I love the thing as much as I love my Spidey 300 cover, because it has a value to me, and it meant a lot to me, and I love that story. But that one of one, that idea that the creator hunched over this, their sweat is in here. I've got a cover that's got coffee stains all over it. And I met the artist, and I asked him about it. He remembered so vividly spilling the coffee and crunching it up and throwing it in the trash and getting angry, and then going to the trash later and pulling it out, smoothing it out, and then inking over it, and then using it because he couldn't redraw the thing from scratch and have the time for it. And that's amazing. It's a part of the lore, and you're a custodian for it. And yeah, I get incredibly excited and giddy. I love having people over to see the Spidey 300 cover. It's not here now, but it's at the museum. But when I have it, people come over and they're like, this is the world is fucked, because this shouldn't be here.
Right.
There should be something. It's ridiculous this exists. I had a guy come over, and I have a folder of like a to-go bag of the valuable art. So in case anything happens, grab that, grab the kids, go. Right. Not in that order. Grab the kids, grab that, then go. And it's got one page. It's got a Jim Lee cover on it. Turn the page. It's the first Gambit cover on Spidey 300. And he turned the page, and he was like, oh my God. And I was like, I know. And he's like, Gambit. I was like, yeah, Gambit. And he looks at the other one. He goes back to Gambit. this is Gambit. Oh my God, I love this book. Yeah. And he looks at back 300, starts talking Gambit. It took him like 3 minutes before he asked, is this real? That's Spidey 300. That's the real one. And then he lost his mind. It was amazing. He just couldn't register that the original art that Todd McFarlane drew, that's been homaged a million times from a book that he's seen his entire life, that we all love, is sitting right there. I pulled it out and he didn't want to touch it. I've never had that experience. It's showing to my comic book, no matter what comic book it is.
Yeah.
Thing about it, that's just, I love. So
yeah, it's interesting. Even when you just described it to me, when you like explain like the artist hunched over working on this, it's like, you're right. Like there's like this sort of spirit, you know, that like exists in this thing that you can't quantify, but you understand that, like, or you know, when you look at the original art, sometimes I look at it and I know that it's original art, but in my mind, I don't process it. Like it's like, oh, it looks like, yeah, it's a print. I've seen a print. No. This is like somebody was doing this, and there's something so cool about that, for sure.
I love it because especially when you have it, you can look. There's line work on the edges where the bleed is that you don't get to see in a print or a comic book. There are marks that are too light, blue line or light pencils that weren't inked over, that you get to see detail. You get to see things on the back. I've got the cover to Man of Steel 18, the first Doomsday, and on the back, Bogdanovich drew Bogdan. I can never say his name. The artist drew Superman holding the piece of art with a little balloon that says, "This might be important someday." A buddy of mine has the cover to X-Men War #1, and on the back, it's a sketch of Conan. And I heard from Bob Layton that he and Jim Shooter were talking about creating an Iron Man type character, and they couldn't figure out how to make it not derivative. And then they started talking about the business, and Bob was just doodling, and he doodled Conan. And he goes, "I've got it. It's not a genius inventor in the suit. It's a caveman. It's from the past." And then they came up with one of my favorite characters of all time, X-Men War. That's a piece of lore, not just a piece of production.
Right. It's interesting. I've wanted to do more topics on the original art side of things. I feel like that subset of, I guess you could kind of lump it all into like the collector comic space, for sure. Although it feels like it's a little bit adjacent. Has that market gone up? Like, I feel like recently I've been hearing more about the big sales, the Secret Wars 8, you know, the original, or the splash page or whatever, and things like that. Obviously it's always been very, very expensive, but being in it, do you feel like it's sort of exploded more recently as far as like the hype and the values and the you know, the fervor around it?
Yeah, I think comics and art both blew up recently. And I think a lot of finance people came into it because they looked historically at the numbers and saw that despite recessions, both held their value tremendously. I think a lot of people then felt safe in comics to a certain extent. Also, I mean, who can buy property? Who understands the stock market? Our generation is going to gravitate towards what we know and love. And if we're going to get cheated out of our money by the real estate market or the Wall Street, get cheated out of our money in comics makes us happier. And I think a lot of people came in and they were big collectors. And what I've seen in the art world is those big collectors eventually do what I did. They all graduate into original art. And even the older art collectors, I think, did the same thing, from my understanding, from the ones I've met. And recently, as comics have dipped a little bit, art has not. So the art world has maintained, and in the private sector, the private sales in the art world, I mean, a buddy of mine just bought a piece for $1 million. Wow. Which it's, you know, there's no $1 million sales happening right now in comics. That's happening. $750,000 sales happening consistently every couple months in the art world right now. 6 figures for sure. But it's an elite crew. Yeah. And I think there's not a lot of it. There's not a lot of art. Most of the Marvel covers don't exist. A lot of the bigger Marvel books are questionable if they exist. Were they stolen and they exist out there in kind of illegal hands? Or were destroyed during the process? Unclear. Right.
Last little question about that. Who are the people that are in this space as you've come to know? I assume, like, you know, obviously people know you have ASM 300. So I'm sure there's been times people knock on your door being like, so, you know, what would you let it go for? And people asking things like that. Yeah. Who are these people? Is it just people who've done very, very well, big, you know, whatever, business owners and things of that nature, who just like have an affinity towards Spider-Man? They just think he's kind of cool. You know, they have like a fondness for it. Or is it like What kind of clientele, I guess, is hovering in this space?
It's everyone. It's everyone. It's the thing. It's the people you're thinking about, but it's more than that. Some of my friends that are big collectors are, one's an HR manager at a medium-sized firm. One owns a carpet store with his father-in-law. One is kind of a medium-sized investment banker, not like a tremendous amount of money. They've just decided, as a family, we have a certain amount of investment we can make, and I know this market, and I believe in this market, and I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, and I'm going to invest in this, and that's their point of view, and they get to love it, and maybe they'll be able to make enough they can keep a few pieces. Maybe they'll give it to their kids down the road. Maybe they'll sell it in 5, 10, 20 years. But there also are wealthy people. I know a billionaire who's a art collector, some very famous Hollywood people. Louis LaRosa, his art on Megalith, the vast majority of that went to filmmakers in Hollywood. They love his work. They love the rendering. They love the compositions, and they scooped up a bunch of that stuff really early on. Mm-hmm. It runs the gamut.
Yeah. Well, with that, Dinesh, I think I've taken up a lot of your time. So I think it's a good time to kind of wrap it up. Appreciate you kind of coming on and having this conversation with me.
Thank you.
You can tell the people, where they can find you. Maybe tell them about Megalith one more time. How much time do we have left during the recording of this video, and where they can find you on the socials?
Megalith is on Kickstarter. If you Google Megalith, Kickstarter, or Bad Idea, any combination of that, you'll find it. Or look at our social media. We're on Bad Idea Hello at Twitter, Bad Idea Hello at Instagram. Bad Idea Corp is our website with a mailing list where we give away comics all the time. Megalith has 12 days left as of today. After that, the hardcover is done, and that book will be in stores when it's done.
Thanks again so much. Appreciate your time, and yeah, we'll see you on the next one.